I'm gonna show you every aeroplane that has remote control guns in War Thunder. Some are rather sci-fi, and others are as basic as it gets. Let's start with Italy. Up first, the SM-91, which has a very unique R2-D2 sort of turret in the back. It's a single 20mm machine gun in a sort of turret that can pop out from the frame, and it can shoot in between the twin tail boom at the back. To be honest, I don't actually find this tail gun much useful. This is a theme you're going to see a lot throughout the video. But it has a rather unique design and seems practically sci-fi for the time. The SM-92 is a twin tail boom plane, and this time it has the same cannon, but this time it is fixed in the rear stabilizer. It can only fire straight backwards, and I think this is unhistorical, but for a lot of these guns that are fixed in War Thunder, they do actually give you 1 degree up and down, left and right traverse, which I think is for gameplay reasons. You'll be hard pressed to make actual use of this in War Thunder gameplay. Next, the P108. Now these are pretty interesting, so all the P108s have them. In the outer engine mounting, you've got 2 turrets with 2 machine guns in each turret that are got very good traversal rate, very good up and down, left and right. They're actually quite useful for gameplay, but because they're so far out, there are sometimes issues where you're almost going cross-eyed with the guns trying to actually track the target that is intercepting you. But overall, these guns are actually pretty effective. No other plane in the game actually has a design like this, with the machine guns mounted so far out from the central fuselage. Moving on now to America, home of the Dakar. And we're starting off with the A-26B, which has 2 remote controlled machine guns, one on top of the fuselage and one underneath the fuselage, and I think both of them are controlled from a single rear gunner. These guns are pretty good, but there is one downside to the top gunner, and he can't shoot straight backwards to the tail. You don't have a split tail, which makes things a little bit awkward when you're being intercepted from straight behind. But you've got 2 50 cals in each turret. That is a lot of firepower and more than enough to deal with fighters that are trying to intercept you. The top gun can even shoot in front of you, which is quite handy in a pinch as well when you're trying to, in the rare case, be chasing someone. For P61. Now this is a rather unique sci-fi plane, like the silhouette of the fuselage itself, ignoring the twin tail boom, is weird. You got that radar on the nose, that's why I think it's so extended out, but you've got a single remote controlled defensive machine gun where you got 4 50 cals in a single turret, and you've got 2 gunners for this turret, one sitting in the back of the plane and one sitting in the front of the plane, and both of them can control this gun. From my understanding, this plane was meant to be used as an interceptor, and that twin tail boom at the back, that allows the remote control gun to shoot straight backwards without hitting the tail section. You got very good traverse on the top of gun, it's very fast. The only downside in War Thunder is that the gun actually always defaults to the rear position in flight, which can be annoying when you're trying to chase somebody, because this is actually a heavy fighter, and unfortunately it takes time for that gun on top to rotate around to the front, and as soon as you lose the target, that gun goes back to its default position in the rear. The B-17E. Now everyone knows the B-17 is famous with that ball turret underneath, but this version doesn't have the ball turret. It seems to have a remote controlled machine gun, similar to the ball turret but a bit more shorter. I'm not actually sure how this turret was controlled. You can see the gunner is just inside there. B-17G. Now this version has the ball gunner as you expect, but in the front we've now got a chin turret. I think this was because German pilots were getting a bit confident that to intercept American heavy bombers all they had to do was do a head-on, and I think the response was to mount extra Dakar in the nose. So we got this chin turret that has a surprisingly good amount of rotation left and right, and good traversal up and down, but mainly left and right. It can shoot almost like 85 degrees left and right. It's a pretty effective gun in gameplay as well, because when you are getting intercepted in ARB, you know that you at least stand slight chance in a head-on. A slight chance, but it's better than nothing. Moving on to the B-29. Now this plane was practically sci-fi for its time. Not only flying higher than basically anything else at the time, but also the technology on board. So it has 4 remote controlled machine gun stations. With these guns they had onboard ballistic computers, so you would aim your reticle at the intercepting plane, and the onboard computer would calculate the lead needed. You, the user, wouldn't need to calculate the lead, the computer's doing that for you. And this is in a plane! In 1945, that is mental! The rear gunner, still done the old-fashioned way. Overall, you have really amazing 50 cals in every single direction, traversal rate very good, angles of coverage very good. Unfortunately, you do get shot down pretty easily. Onwards to the land of the rising sun, and for the J1N1, which is available in the regular tech tree quite early on. And this almost looks like a plane designed in the Hearts of Iron 4 plane maker, where you've got 2 sets of defensive machine gun modules added, and they're just sort of stacked both on top of each other because they thought one's not enough, let's just add a second one just in case. Pretty good traversal, 60 degrees on both of them, up and down and left and right. Not that useful, but the design looks very sci-fi to me. I love the way I think the canopy sort of goes into the plane in flight when they want to expose those machine guns, so that they can keep the fuselage flush in level flight, and then when they're getting intercepted, retract that back in. The G8N1. I am not too sure if this machine gun is actually remote. It's being controlled by somebody very close to the gun, but I can't figure out how they actually control the darn thing. It's completely glass for some reason, the bottom gunner, but it's not configured in a way that a human can actually sit in there. I could use your guys' opinions in the comments below whether this is actually a remote controlled machine gun or not. Up next, Germany. Now they have a lot of remote controlled guns. Starting with the HE-155. For me setting up the expectation of a lot of guns, this one isn't so sophisticated. It's got two light machine guns arranged in both the engine cowlings, just in a fixed shooting straight back position. They do a 1 degree traversal left and right, but again I think that's Gaijin being nice to the players of the game, trying to make things slightly more useful than they are. I do like how the bullet trajectory is just about enough to avoid hitting the rear stabilizer. So in theory, if an enemy is attacking behind you, your rear gunner might not be able to shoot straight for the tail and it's blocked. But maybe the MGs within the engine cowlings, maybe they might be able to hit the guy flying straight behind you. Next, the Heinkel 111 H6. This Heinkel 111 has a little secret in the tail section where it's got a machine gun sticking out there. I barely noticed it. It's only this version of the 111 that has it, but it's a single little machine gun just poking out the tail section. I don't know who's operating this MG. Unlike other fixed MGs though, this one actually has 5 degrees left or right, up and down. And I'm thinking, who controls this one? I have no idea who can steer this, who can elevate or depress it, who's controlling this. It's another handy thing because on the Heinkel 111 you do have a top gunner and you do have a bottom gunner, but the top gunner is interrupted by the tail. You can't shoot straight through it, so that's where the rear MG in the tail comes from. Will it actually help you for being intercepted? Probably not, but it was nice to have that thing there. Next, the Ju-288, and this one is pretty impressive as well. Another sci-fi sort of plane with 4 remote control machine gun stations with excellent traversal angles on all of them, good MGs. They pretty much cover all the fields of fire, and if you're being intercepted from behind, it can be terrifying for the interceptor with 5 machine guns firing at them at once. It's a pretty cool plane overall anyway. I do like how all the crew are kept up front in a single cockpit. Next, the ME-410. I'm going to be showing you the B1, but all of the ME-410 variants have these defensive machine guns, which is 2 defensive machine guns on the left and right, and they're on this sort of unique circular plate where they can rotate pretty much all the way up and all the way down, and the guns can lean right and left, outwards from the fuselage. And for me, this is one of those sci-fi concepts because they didn't mount them on top or below, but they mounted them to the sides of the fuselage, which is not something you see on other planes. Next, the Heinkel 177. This is only a single remote control machine gun station at the very top in the middle of the fuselage. It's similar to the other German MG turrets on the Ju-288. This gun's pretty okay, you've pretty much seen it on the Ju-288. Next up, the Soviet Union, and starting with the PE-3. So all the PE-3s, they've got a machine gun in the tail section, and it's sort of similar to the Heinkel 111, except unlike that plane, this doesn't have a single tail, it's got a split tail. So unlike the Heinkel 111, this plane has a split tail boom. So that means that the top gunner can actually shoot straight through the tail. So I wasn't quite sure why they added this to the PE-3, but I assumed they just wanted extra protection. It is good in theory, it's another fixed gun. This one offers 2 degrees left or right and up and down, which is more than the regular 1 degree up and down as we found out on other planes. But what I was trying to talk about was that because you got a split tail, the top gunner can already help out, so I don't really understand why you want the addition of this machine gun. But maybe it's just a little bit more dakka for just in case you're being intercepted and they're straight behind you. Then you got a little surprise. You can barely see this machine gun poking out as well. It's just underneath the fuselage at the very tippy tip back of the plane. Next, the BE-6. The BE-6 is actually a pretty modern plane with a lot of good features like the IL-28's tail gunner, and then that top gun is from the Tu-4. The top gun is very useful as it's twin 23mm, very fast traversal rate, very good elevation depression, but it does have the downside of most of the plane is actually blocking its angles. You can't shoot through the tail area quite easily, so you can only shoot at people intercepting from above. and then you can't really shoot left or right in quite a lot of areas as they're blocked by the rear stabilizers. And then you've got the gull-styled wings in the front with the giant engines that are quite high up. So that also blocks angles from shooting at the front, so I don't really find this gun that handy. Unless you're being dived on from above, then that's what the gun excels at. If you're being intercepted from behind, it's going to be up to that rear gunner to help out more. In the front, I was also debating whether this is actually a remote controlled machine gun. It has a rather unique setup where you kind of got the gun above the controller, but is not behind the gun, so that's why I wanted to include it as a remote controlled gun. I'll leave that up to you guys again. The TU-4. Now those of you with a sharp eye are like, wait a minute, this is just a B-29, and yes it is, this is the Soviet B-29, except they rebuilt it from scratch. Without original design documents, they just copied 3 B-29s that the Soviet Union had, and they made the TU-4. Now unlike the B-29, the defensive guns are all 23mm instead of 50 cals. It's a lot of DACA if you're trying to intercept this thing. All the machine guns are in the exact same place as the B-29, so good traversal rates, good fire rates. Really don't want to intercept this one in ARB. I don't mind bullying B-29s, but TU-4s, I mean a single 23mm and it's game over. 50 cal you can take like 1 or 2 of them maybe. Onwards to Britain, and we're starting with the Blenheim. The Blenheim has a single remote control machine gun located just underneath the cockpit. Traversal rates aren't that good, 20 degrees left or right and 35 degrees down and 5 degrees up. I mean, you can't go that much up otherwise you'll hit the plane. It is fun though because this plane is at BR 1.3. You do have a lot of firepower if you're being intercepted in like Air Arcade. Unfortunately, this is really the only case of remote controlled guns being used on British planes. Next we have the Lincoln. And this is also similar to the BE-6 situation where we've got that front gunner located underneath the machine gun they're meant to be operating. But I'm not sure if it actually counts as remote controlled. It is remote as he isn't like standing behind the gun. But it's still like, I feel like I'm stretching the definition here. I do want to point out though, I do love the canopy of this area though. This reminds me of like the front of an airship, you know, the gondola carriage, where you're surveying the landscape around you. You've got that lovely glass there. But here's also what perplexes me is that the glass is very boxy, it's not curved. Now boxy implies that it might be armoured glass, but according to War Thunder it is not armoured. But if it was armoured, why not just make curved glass in the first place? Really cool defensive machine gun setup though. And lastly we have the French MB-174A-3 with its triple defensive machine gun located underneath the fuselage. This machine gun offers 5 degrees left to right and 5 degrees up and down. I don't actually know who's controlling this machine gun, but it's okay. It's underneath the fuselage, so it doesn't have an obstructive view straight backwards. It is handy in a pinch. You do have a top gunner there as well to cover like if you're being intercepted from above, and if you're being intercepted straight from behind, you have those triple light machine guns to give you a hand. So that was every remote controlled machine gun station in War Thunder. If I did miss any, please feel free to correct me in the comments.